Hello everybody, welcome to the GSL English Club. My name is Gideon and I've decided to start recording podcasts to help you improve your English. So the idea behind this is we're going to read an article together today. As we go through, we're going to look at the vocabulary, we're going to talk about it, I'm going to give you my opinion. You might agree with me, you might disagree, that is absolutely fine. Let me know in the comments. But really, the basis of these videos is just to help you take in something in English this week in a relaxed and comfortable environment. So I do recommend, my lovely assistant / wife has just bought me a coffee. So thank you very much. So I do very much agree with a coffee during the podcast. So if you've got a drink of preference, whether that be a coffee, tea, something a little bit stronger, whatever it is, whatever you need just to sit back, relax and enjoy this podcast together. I shall be drinking coffee if you'd like to join me. But the idea, is just to take in something in English. So you can listen to this podcast, you can watch it. I do request that you subscribe to the channel. Now, this is all new to me, so any support really helps me out. But let's get into it. Okay. So today we're going to be reading an article from learnenglish.britishcouncil.org. You'll find the link to the article below. Fantastic website. I highly recommend you go on this website, check it out if you want to practice your business English, you want to learn new vocabulary, or even if you're just not too sure what to learn or practice in English this week. This website is absolutely fantastic, so I highly recommend it. So we're going to be reading an article today entitled 5 Tips to Improve Your English Vocabulary. Now, a little disclaimer at the beginning. These are just 5 tips. Some of them might work for you, some of them might not. That is not a problem. I think sometimes we can get in a habit of clicking on videos that say, I don't know, these 5 tips will change your English. Use these 5 tips to master fluency. It's not true. The reality is there are thousands of tips. You've just got to find different ones that work for you and mix it up. We don't want our English learning to get stale. And when we say stale, we mean that it's just not exciting anymore. We just find it boring. We're just doing it because we have to. That is not what we want. So maybe one of these tips will work for you today. Maybe it doesn't. Either way, let me know in the comments. Okay, very good. 5 tips to improve your English vocabulary. So let's start with the introductory paragraph and then we'll break it down. Okay. Do you want to learn new words and phrases in English? Here are 5 tips to improve your English vocabulary. Learning vocabulary is a big part of learning a language. The more English words you learn, the better you can communicate your needs, ideas, thoughts, and feelings to other people in English. Vocabulary is essential for understanding too. In fact, learning new words is one of the biggest things you can do to improve your reading and listening. So what can you do to build your English vocabulary quickly and effectively? Here are 5 tips for better vocabulary learning. Okay, that's the idea of this article. That's where we're going to go. Now, I like this initial statement. Learning vocabulary is a big part of learning a language. So true. The more vocabulary we have, the more tools we have to express ourselves. I always illustrate it like this, that imagine you were going to do some construction. Maybe change your kitchen or bathroom in your home. The more tools you have, the easier that job becomes. It's the same with English. The more vocabulary we have, the easier it is to express ourselves. And as it says here, the better you can communicate. And when we go back to the reason why we started learning English, it's all about communication. That is what we want. We want to be able to express ourselves around the world with different people. Grammar is important, sentence structure is important, but the biggest thing is communication. Vocabulary helps us to do that. So I do highly agree. We want to express our ideas, our thoughts clearly, articulately. Vocabulary will help. Very good. Now, one little disclaimer I'd like to put here is, so what can you do to build your English vocabulary quickly? Of course, we do want to make the most of our learning time. When we sit down and we practice English or we watch an amazing podcast like this, we do want to make the most of it. But I wouldn't focus on learning vocabulary quickly. I wouldn't make that your goal. I would change that to learn vocabulary consistently. And in turn, you'll just, at a faster pace, learn vocabulary. So I wouldn't focus on learning vocabulary quickly, because then we're going to go on to discuss that. It changes the whole process, and I don't like it. So I'm going to change that word, not quickly, to consistently. And if we are consistent with something, we regularly do it, okay, at the time that we said we were going to do it. Okay, there we go. There's the introduction. You get the idea of the podcast. Hopefully you're still watching. I really hope you are. If not, why not? Come back. Why have you left me? Okay, point number one. I'm just going to take a little sipple of water. I realized I looked in the camera when I took a sip then, and it made it weird. I didn't mean to make that weird, I promise. Okay. All right. Point number one. Write down new words. It's a really good idea to write down useful new vocabulary. The act of writing the words helps you remember them better. Plus, lots of people learn better when they see things written on paper rather than just hearing them. You can add a translation in your language, a definition in English, a note on pronunciation, or even a drawing. The more different links you make between the word and its meaning, the better. Superb suggestion. I love this one. Write down new words. But to me, there is a key word in here. People learn things better when they see things written on what? What does it say? Does it say a tablet? Does it say a device? Does it say your phone? No. It says paper. What is paper? I think in this day and age, how often do we write on paper? Well, I really encourage you all to give this a try. Pen and paper. Because we use the phones, because we use technology for everything now. Everything, I write notes on my phone all the time, or on a computer, or on a tablet. We've now created a fantastic opportunity to write on paper just for English. If that's not something that you do, you can now associate just writing with a pen and a paper. You can just associate that with your English language learning. Give it a try. Go out, buy yourself a nice new pad, get yourself a pen, some highlighters, and enjoy it. Just have a pad for English, a notepad for English vocabulary. And when we write it down physically, it is proven that that helps us to remember it. So give that a try. Go back to pen and paper. You might have to teach yourself to write again because it's been so long. But yeah, and as you write the word down, we're not just writing down 100 words. Write one word down and then expand upon that. It says add a translation in your language, a definition in English, notes on the pronunciation. Maybe you write how you would phonetically pronounce it. Maybe the IPA next to it, the International Phonetic Alphabet. Oh, I love this one. Even a drawing. Why not? If you're writing down an emotion, write down draw a face that expresses that emotion. Whatever it is, find a way that works for you. There is no right or wrong way. It's just with this exercise, pen, paper. That is it. Okay? So write down new words. Words you hear in music, podcasts, movies, whatever it is. Keep your notepad and pen on you. Write it down. Okay, very good. Number two, Revise new vocabulary regularly. Now, just a note on this word revise. When we revise something, it means to go over, to read again, to study. We might revise for an exam. Okay. So you've got an English notebook full of useful vocabulary to remember. But did you know that if you don't look again at the new words and phrases you've studied, you only remember, on average, 20 to 25% of it? That's a shocking waste of time and effort. The good news is that if you look at your notes again after an hour, again the next day, and once more after a few days, you can make sure that 100% of what you learn goes into your long-term memory. So make 5 minutes each day to revise your English vocabulary. The more you look backwards, the faster you go forwards. Very motivational sentence to end on there. Okay. I guess this is coming in stages. So we've got our notepad full of new vocabulary. The idea here is to look at it again. And I do agree with this first statistic that writing it down and then never looking at it again, you might remember 20 to 25% of those words. I would agree with that. And it says here, that really is a shocking waste of time and effort, which is kind of true, isn't it? If we're taking an hour to write down new words, taking time drawing, whatever it is, and we only remember 20% of that, that means that only 20% of our time was effective. And we are busy people. We haven't got time for that. So we want 100% of our time to be effective. Now, this next statistic, that if we look at our notes again after an hour, the next day, blah, 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 make sure you remember 100%. I think that's very optimistic. I know that in the way my mind works, I will never remember 100% of anything. So set yourself a goal of maybe remembering 80% of what you write down. But the key is to revise. Now, this doesn't have to be an hour of revision every day. Maybe you pick up your notepad as you have a cup of coffee or a cup of tea, and you just go through what you wrote that morning, the day before, and just go through those sentence structures again that you wrote down, the words, the vocabulary. But that is the idea. Don't just write and the next day write again, and the next day write again. Maybe we can come up with a program, that on Mondays we write down new vocabulary. On Tuesdays we study that vocabulary, whatever it is. But the idea there is to revise. And I love this next point, 5 minutes each day. So maybe we could just include that into our daily English learning schedule. 5 minutes every day to revise vocabulary we have previously studied. Fantastic. Now, I made a conscious effort there to not look at you in the eye as I sip water. I don't know, but even that felt weird. No, okay. All right, very good. Point number 3, to read in English. They say the best way to learn a language is by immersion, spending time completely surrounded by that language. Well, reading is like immersion through your imagination. Reading is amazing for your English in general, but it's particularly good for learning new vocabulary. That's because understanding a new word as part of a story makes it much more memorable than trying to learn a list of words out of context. Okay, that first statement is brilliant. The best way to learn a language is by immersion. Now, the idea of immersion is to be fully surrounded. For example, if we were immersed in water, we would be fully surrounded by water. And I think we would all agree that the best way to learn a language is by being fully surrounded by it. People that move to a country generally learn the language a lot faster. One, because they've got no choice, they have to speak it. But two, because they are fully immersed. But we might, live in a country where we can't do that. So, reading. Reading is a brilliant way of immersing ourselves in the language because we're activating our imagination. And reading is honestly just such an amazing thing because, we're not being told what to see what to think, how we picture it. We are completely using our own minds and imagination. And I think that is an amazing thing. For example, if we all read the same book, we would have, although we might have a brief description of the character, we would all have different images in our minds of the characters, the settings, the way scenes develop. Visually, it would be different. That is why reading is just amazing. It activates the imagination. But it is particularly good for being introduced and learning new vocabulary. Because what we're doing is we're taking vocabulary and we're associating it with a story, with literature. So that word association really helps us to remember that word. For example, when we see it again, we'll think, oh yeah, I read that in such and such a book. Now, a little idea I give you here is find a book you enjoy. Don't just read something because your teacher said you must read this book. Don't just read something because a friend said, this will help you in English. Find something you enjoy. For me, I love cars. Everything about cars. So, I would read a book about cars or a story about a driver. Science fiction. If you're into science fiction, a book I highly recommend, a series, Hyperion. If anybody has read those series, not that I don't even know if anybody's going to watch this, but if any of the 5 possible people that watch this podcast have read Hyperion, I will give you a free lesson. I want proof that you've read it. That's a bold statement. Yeah, I'll give you a free lesson. If you can show me proof that you have read Hyperion, I'll give you a free 15-minute lesson. All right, English lesson. But yeah, basically just find a book you like, you enjoy. Don't just read for the sake of reading. And as we go through, some people are happy to highlight in their books. I'm not, but if you are, highlight new words, carry on reading, and then go back to those words. Or if you want, as soon as you come across a new word that you don't know, look it up, study it, write it in your notepad. Okay, reading. Read in English. Okay, very good. Yeah, I like that. Okay, it ended that sentence with learn is much more memorable than trying to learn a list of words out of context. Out of context. So we are going to see how we can learn from context. Okay, point number 4. Speaking of context, let's talk more about that. Literally, context means that text that comes before and after a particular word. It also refers to the situation in which a word is used. Context is your friend when you are learning new vocabulary. It helps you guess the meaning of words you don't know. It shows you how a word is used in a sentence, and it helps you remember the word for longer. This means learning vocabulary by reading and listening is more effective than trying to study word lists. It also means that it's better to make a note of how a word is used in a sentence rather than just the word on its own. For example, instead of to make up, to invent, try learning, he totally made the story up. You've got useful information there about the meaning, the types of things people make up, and the word order. Okay, very good. Yeah, this context is essential for vocabulary. And when we talk about context, we're basically talking about the words, the structures that surround that particular word. And again, context helps us to understand the word that we are looking at. It helps us to learn the meaning because we're seeing it within a larger picture. You know what I mean? Imagine if you zoomed in on a picture of London and you saw a window. You just see a window. That is it. But as you zoom out further, you see the rest of the information, and you might see that is a window from the Houses of Parliament. And you get so much more context. It's the same when we're learning new vocabulary. If we just look at a word, okay, we can see what that word is. But when we zoom out, we see the whole context, and that helps us to understand the meaning. And I really agree with this point. This means learning vocabulary by reading and listening is more effective than trying to study word lists. Now, I'll get people come to me quite a lot and they'll say, Gideon, I write down 50 words a day, 100 words a day, but my vocabulary doesn't seem to improve. That's because it's not really the best technique, if we're being totally honest. Learning new vocabulary by just writing down new words, the next day 50 words, the next day 50 words. Unless you're an absolute genius, you are not going to remember those words. Or you might remember them, but you won't remember the definitions. You won't remember the context. So I would highly recommend that as you study vocabulary, as you go through, write down the word, but then write it down in the sentence that you saw it. The sentence structure, write down the meaning of that sentence, as much information as you can. It's better to have one word that fills a page rather than 50 words on one page. And what I mean by that is one word and you have so much more information. You have notes, you have drawings, you have definitions, you have translations. Develop your own encyclopedia of vocabulary. I'm a real firm believer of this. Context is essential to improving vocabulary. Yeah, very good. Okay, well done. We're getting there. Fifth and final point, and this is probably the most essential. Use it or lose it. Following the use it or lose it principle, using words is the best way to make sure you don't forget them. So try using new vocabulary as soon as you can when you are speaking or writing in English. Have you noticed that you often need to use the same words and phrases when you are communicating in English? It's really worth the effort to practice the most common and the most useful words for you. Researchers have found that you need to see or hear a word on average 10 times to remember it. But when you are actively making an effort with a word, for example, you ask the person you're talking to how to say something, you learn it much faster. So get out there. Try to get as much exposure to English as you can and take every opportunity to communicate in English with other people. Very good. And just as a note, this article was written by Joe Gore. Joe Gore, we thoroughly enjoyed that. Thank you. This really is the point. Use it or lose it. We might have a notepad full of vocabulary, but what use is that if we don't use it? We might buy a load of tools, a new hammer, a new drill to fit our kitchen. But what use are they if we don't use them? So yeah, but a lot of people say, I'm just too scared. I'm just way too nervous to speak in English. I do understand that, and I think every second language learner, third language learner understands that it is not always easy. But the more we use words, the better we get. For example, if you want to build muscle, the first time you go to a gym, you feel like an idiot. You walk in, you feel like everybody's looking at you, thinking, what is he doing? But the more you go to the gym, you realize nobody's looking at you. You realize you just do your own thing. And you also realize that just people respect you for trying. And if they don't respect you for trying, then who cares? Kind of adopt that thinking with your English language. People will respect you for trying. People don't care if you make mistakes. And if they do care, they do, maybe make a joke about you, then walk away. They're not worth the time. But really try and use the language as much as you can. I like this point here, that practice the most common and most useful words for you. So think about your situation, where you are. Maybe you'll just moved to England. Maybe it's just trying to find sentences about ordering food, buying something, asking for directions. In your line of work, maybe you occasionally make phone calls in English. What do you talk about? What questions do you repeatedly have to ask? Practice those. And I have actually heard this research before, that you need to see or hear a word on average 10 times to remember it. For me, it's about 50, but I'm slow. So, this is repetition really is important when it comes to improving our vocabulary. But actively make an effort to try and speak in English. It might be with friends and family. As a suggestion, if you've got friends and family that are learning English, have meal times where you're all only allowed to talk in English. Or if you go out with your mates, Let's say to me, for the next 10 minutes, all of us have got to speak in English. You'll make mistakes, but you're all trying. And it is quite fun, but just try to create those opportunities to speak in English. Don't worry so much. Use it or lose it. And that really is true. Get as much exposure to English as you can. And if we expose ourselves to English, we are taking in as much as we can or seizing every opportunity. Listening, writing, reading, speaking. Just to get out there. I like that. Get out there. Speak English on the phone, to yourself in the mirror. Whatever it is, speak in English. Okay, very good. So there you have it. We have write down new words, revise new vocabulary regularly, read in English, learn from context, and use it or lose it. But that really was a great article. Again, they're just 5 tips. They're not the most, they're not the only tips out there. There's a lot more. But think about it. Give those a try. Let me know in the comments which one of those you already do, or which tip you're going to try. But also, let me know if you enjoyed this video. I hope you did. My goal is to make a podcast each week just to help you practice learning in English. Now, I've put the link in the little description below. A little tip for pronunciation. Repeat after me when I am reading. Pause and repeat. So for example, let's just take the first sentence here. Do you want to learn new words and phrases in English? Pause, repeat after me. Try that process to improve your pronunciation. It's called shadow reading and it's absolutely fantastic. But there you go. I've been your teacher today. My name is Gideon. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate your support and I'll see you all next week. Bye-bye.